So back in 2004, I was driving my lovely spouse to a conference. She is an obstetrician gynecologist and was working as such at the time. And the big national conference in her field was being held in Philadelphia. Now, I'm an academic computer scientist. I'm a computer science professor. I've been to lots of conferences. I knew what to expect. And so I was sort of surprised when I got there and discovered that right there at the conference, where the attendees had to enter, there were protesters carrying signs and chanting. And I thought to myself, that doesn't really make any sense. This is an OBGYN conference. They're about trying to improve women's health. I don't see much to protest here. But the fact of the matter is that the stuff that they do in obstetrics and gynecology is, it touches some hot-button issues. So they work on abortion, they do contraception. Some of the protesters there were actually protesting circumcision. So there was, I don't know why that's an issue, but that's what they were concerned about. So they were marching around, and I thought to myself, wow, I'm really glad I'm not in a field where people are protesting and getting all upset. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I realized, wait a second. What I do is studying artificial intelligence. We're trying to make machines that have the kinds of intelligence that people have. And if we're successful, there's very few things more threatening to our identity as human beings as our ability to think intelligently and to think at all. So, if we were doing our job well, people would be upset. Probably the fact that we don't have protesters means we're just not doing a very good job. So just imagining a time in the future when in fact, artificial intelligence is being protested. And I thought, okay, well, that would be a sign that we're doing better. Well, anyway, flash forward some 13 years, and this summer here in Providence, the annual meeting of the governors of the states in the US all got together and met and tried to talk about their shared problems. And one of their invited speakers was a fellow by the name of Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk is a tech entrepreneur. He's the head of SpaceX and also Tesla Motors, the electric car company. And he got in front of people and said that of all the things that we should be worried about as governors, AI, that's the thing, artificial intelligence, you should really be very concerned about that. It represents a fundamental existential threat. Like human extinction is on the line if we don't regulate it and deal with these problems appropriately. So that seems really concerning. He didn't express at the time what the argument was, why it was something that he was afraid of, but he said, I'm afraid and you should be very afraid. Now, I'm not afraid, and I want to kind of convey to you what the issues are, why it is that he's concerned and why it is that, say, I'm not concerned, and give you a sort of idea of what the future it might look like with respect to artificial intelligence. So I think the most important thing to say right off the bat is that there are at least two different ways that people use the term artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a research field that we study in computer science. We build robots, we make programs that make various kinds of decisions. And that's something that we study day to day, and it's been underway for quite some time. But artificial intelligence is also a term that's used in science fiction to represent this sort of notion of machines that have become aware of their environments, aware of what their capabilities are, they can plan ahead, they can make their own decisions and their own goals and pursue them. And to be clear, this first kind of artificial intelligence is something that we have with us today, and it's, as Kip was mentioning, it's hard to get robots to do interesting things, to get software to not be stupid. But there's also this notion of artificial intelligence that we might call artificial general intelligence, systems that are as smart as people across the board. And this is something that doesn't exist. You can think of artificial intelligence as being represented by the kinds of robots that are stumbling around today, and you can think of artificial general intelligence as maybe the kind of robots that you might see in a Terminator movie who are, out to destroy us and are very good at their jobs, and they'll be back. So I think to understand this distinction and understand why I'm not concerned, part of it is the extrapolation from the AI that we have now to this kind of hypothetical AI that we don't know how to build, that we don't know that it exists or that it could exist, is the main issue that I want to try to get across. So let me say a few words about what artificial intelligence is, if you don't know a little bit about the history. So back in 1956, a group of researchers, early computer scientists who were just getting to think about what computers can do, were very interested in making computers that could exhibit the kinds of computational processes or thought processes that people have. They decided they would get together at Dartmouth College and they'd work it all out, and maybe over the course of a summer they would solve this, and then we can all get on with other things. And some of the problems that they identified were things like, how do you make machines that use language? How do you make machines that can improve themselves, that can learn from their experience? These were great goals, and in fact, they've kept us busy for some 60 years since then. But they didn't solve it over the summer, obviously. But in fact, a lot of progress has been made. And so let me say a few words about various ways that artificial intelligence is with us today. So one thing is, maybe you have an artificial intelligence piece of software in your pocket, these devices that actually let you navigate to locations in the world are just chock-a-block full of the kinds of AI systems that we've been designing, the field has been designing for decades. So just to spell it out, maybe in a little bit of detail, you might want to ask your phone how to navigate from here to Power Street in Providence. And so to do that, you take out your phone and you speak at it, and what the phone receives is a speech signal. So this is the speech signal of me actually saying, take me to Power Street. And that's what it looks like. It's just a bunch of patterns or numbers. The problem of speech recognition is the problem of turning that signal, that speech signal, into words, into symbols. And that's a problem that's been with us for a long time, and people have made a tremendous amount of progress on it in the last 5 to 10 years, and now speech recognition kind of works. But that's not the end of the AI, just in getting directions. You also need to turn that list of symbols into meaning. Like, what is it that you want the phone to do? And so this process of interpreting the individual symbols, the language symbols, and figuring out what the intent is sometimes referred to as natural language processing. It's another problem of getting computers to use language. And this also is something where we've made a lot of progress in the last few years, and now we can reliably recognize when you ask the phone for something, what it is that you're asking for. Maybe not entirely reliably, but very reliably, enough so that we've fielded this to millions and millions of people. So in addition to using language, the system also learns from its experience. And so the way that machine learning comes into play in this kind of system is when the system is trying to figure out what path you should take to get to Power Street, what it's actually doing is evaluating all the possible different routes and figuring out which one is going to lead to the fastest travel time to get you there in the shortest amount of time. To do that, it actually has to make estimates. It has to say, okay, here's a little piece of the street, say South Water Street. How long is that going to take to traverse? Now you could say, well, just use the speed limit, but that's not exactly what people typically do. There could be traffic, there could be delays of various sorts. And so the ability to predict based on features like, well, where is this piece of road? How big a road is it? What time of day is it? What day of the week is it? All those things get factored in together to generate some kind of prediction. And these predictions are improved by feeding the machine lots and lots and lots of data. So anyway, in the big picture, all these different little AI subproblems come together to provide something that is very valuable to people. And it doesn't seem so scary, right? That's not taking over the world. That's not destroying us in any way. That's kind of helping us to get from place to place. What's the missing step here? And so the way that I like to think about this is, well, if you think about a system that's actually, say, taking you from place to place within a city, maybe even helping to drive you around, that's really subsuming the capabilities of a human job, the job of being, say, a taxi driver. And so we don't have this quite yet, but it's really not hard to imagine in the near future having a system that can do all the things that a taxi driver can do and to get you from place to place. And once that happens, we have an AI system that has all the capabilities that it has, plus it can be a taxi driver. Okay, well, if it can do that, what else can it do? It's not too hard to imagine that the job of, say, a radiologist would also be something that we could absorb into the AI system. A radiologist takes data about slides or x-rays taken in the human body, and they can make various kinds of diagnoses. That seems like a very AI-ish sort of problem. I think we can do that one too. Again, we don't have this yet, but it's not hard to imagine a time when the system has now absorbed as well the job of a radiologist. Okay, well, what would be next? Now, here I am sitting in my lab, maybe with my students, and I think to myself, okay, well, if we can do those things, what else can we do? Maybe we can absorb my job. Or maybe I wouldn't think about it that way. Maybe I think I can absorb the job of all my students, replace them with a machine. So we could all work together and design a piece of AI software that can do the things that an AI researcher can do. We can come up with ideas for designing programs. We can make those programs. We can test them in the field. Like, yeah, so I can actually replace all my grad students with, AI researcher 2.0. And at that point, then we have a brilliant idea. Then we think, okay, we can use our now collective intelligence together to design even better AI researchers, the AI researchers 3.0. Now, at that point, it's a little hard for me to keep up with these AI researchers that I bought from the store and that have improved themselves one notch. And they begin to improve themselves at a very rapid pace, potentially over the course of a weekend, the theory goes. And we experience something that's sometimes referred to as an intelligence explosion. So this intelligence turned back upon itself is resulting in more intelligence, which can generate even more intelligence, which can ultimately absorb all kinds of roles of people. In fact, maybe all possible roles of people. Including people who come to TEDx talks, if you can imagine anything so terrible. At that point, we would have achieved what you can refer to as general superintelligence. So an artificial intelligence system that is smart not only as any individual people, but like anything that a person can do, the system can now do better than us. Now, this isn't a threat in and of itself, but it does leave us, humanity, in a very awkward position because we no longer have control of our own destiny. Right? It's now the machine or the group of machines that can do anything that we can do better than we can do it. And if they decide that, we need help, then maybe they'll help us, and that would be awesome. Or if they could decide that we're in the way, then they can get rid of us, and there's really not much we'd be able to do in response because that's how powerful they are in this story. So this is kind of the crux of the problem. This is the big concern. So just to put a fine point on it, the idea is that we get computers up to a certain point where they can exhibit recursive self-improvement. They can make themselves better, at which point they can create entities of individual brilliance, the likes of which we've never seen. At that point, the fear is that the things that make us special and powerful, the things that humans can do, are now being taken over, so humans become obsolete. And then finally, as a result, we're no longer the dominant species on the planet. We're at the whim of these machines. So that's the story that Elon Musk and others would like you to be afraid of. And it is kind of a scary story, right? It's kind of straight out of Hollywood, because it's kind of straight out of Hollywood. This is not coming out of the science of it, but it's coming out of speculative thinking about the directions that these things can go. And I want to say a few words about why I don't think this is it's a great story, but it's not a path that we're about to follow. So the first thing I want to point out is that if you ask a biologist about who's the dominant species on the planet, they don't instantly say, well, it's us, it's people. People are awesome. I mean, I like people, right? Some of my best friends are people. So it's not like I think that people are doing a terrible job at everything. But it is also the case that if you're going to say we're the dominant species, you need to be careful about your definitions. And it's the case that, for example, in terms of which species have lasted the longest, well, horseshoe crabs have done a lot better job than us at that. And maybe that's not fair, right? They had a head start. We've been maybe doing well since we've gotten here. But again, measured by what? Measured by the individual lifetimes? Well, people live a good long time, but the ocean quahog lives like 4 times longer than us. So, we're good, but there's better. But there's a lot of us, but not nearly as much as there are of Antarctic krill. They're way ahead of us. It's like, oh, that's not fair. They're tiny, right? One of us is like, I don't know, 1 billion of those or something. But if you factor weight into the story, well, cows actually beat us on that front. There's more cow mass on the planet than there is human mass. Of course, that's kind of our fault, right? We actually gave cows that boost. So you can say, well, what about impact on the planet as a whole? And we have had a tremendous impact on the planet. But there's other organisms that have had arguably more impact on the planet. Blue-green algae, of all things, produces 330 billion tons of oxygen each year, a small fraction of which we manage to breathe. There are just lots of things out there that are having a lot more impact on the world than we are. Now, again, people are still very important, and we have a very big role to play. But again, you have to be careful about defining your terms. Now, what about the impact of intelligence on our own destiny? If you ask a historian, they don't necessarily say that it's individual geniuses that have moved everything forward. They'll give the example of, for example, independent discovery, the idea that some brilliant ideas actually are so important to society that they appear in multiple people's heads at sometimes roughly the same time. And so if you actually look at this, and I've been collecting examples of these things because I think it's really neat, there's quite a range of issues that actually come up. The telephone, very impactful on society. The invention of calculus, very impactful on society. They were independently invented by multiple people. Really important things, but also some kind of trivial things. The bacon martini was independently invented by multiple people. A mathematical notation for specifying juggling patterns. 4 different groups had the same idea at the same time for this. And so that's kind of big and little, but all the way in between, too. Beer was independently invented in multiple times in history. And the neural network structures that are actually driving a lot of the progress in AI have been invented by multiple people over the decades. So it's worth pointing out that none of these things happen in a vacuum. Even vacuums didn't happen in a vacuum. They were independently invented by multiple people at around the same time. So these are kind of more general forces in society and not just the brainchilds of individual people. This notion of recursive self-improvement, though, is where people say, well, this is where it's really different from anything else that's come before. But in fact, we try to do recursive self-improvement all the time, and it helps. But it's not a game changer. So an example is teaching is really important. This is how we convey knowledge to people, and you can actually try to teach teachers to be better teachers. There's teaching schools that teach teachers, and that results in better teachers. But again, not completely different kinds of teachers than we have now. They're just better. You have ways of coaching coaches to be better coaches, and you have, of course, ways of parenting parents to be better parents. The most silly one that I've seen is you have crowdfunding startups whose job is to better fund crowdfunding startups so they can found crowdfunding startups. And again, it makes for progress. It just doesn't make game-changing progress. And finally, I want to address the question of human obsolescence. So as machines get better at us at the things that we care about, does that make it so that we don't have a role to play anymore? And I can think of lots of examples in technology from recent years, and AI in particular. But one example that came up that I thought was actually really telling is the following thing. So once upon a time, people decided it was really important to draw sunflowers. And so on the caves that they were living in at the time, they came up with techniques for drawing sunflowers. And they were very lovely sunflowers, very meaningful to people. And over the intervening centuries, people got better and better at drawing sunflowers. And by the 1800s, individual people could draw, experts could draw sunflowers in a way that was almost indistinguishable from real life. Really amazing artistry. Unfortunately, around the same time, photography was invented. Now machines could make sunflowers that were exactly as detailed as reality. They were capturing reality directly. And people's reaction at that time, some people said, okay, well, art is dead. But other people said, no, this is okay. We just have to kind of change the way we're thinking about what art is. And so they came up with Impressionism. They came up with ways of incorporating photography into their art. They came up with ways of using computers to draw sunflowers. And over time, 1,000 flowers would bloom. And as a result, it didn't really end the pursuit of sunflowers. What it really did was it gave us new ways of creating. We got to change the rules. We got to change the goals. And as a result, we became richer for it. So I want to mention one last little example of the impact of AI on society. The real AI, not this sort of weird future sci-fi AI, but real AI has the property that it really does impact people's lives. So since the early days when researchers were just trying to figure out what AI is, it's now something that's impacting millions of lives. And so one of the ways this has happened is, again, if you take your direction-giving software out, in the early days, it had weird glitches in it. And you could ask the system, take me to an abortion clinic, and have it come back and say, there are no abortion clinics. Or the only thing that I can take you to is a crisis pregnancy center, which is staffed by anti-abortion people. These systems are actually changing the opportunities and the affordances that people have as they're getting around in the world. And from that perspective, it's very important that we take AI as it really exists extremely seriously. It's up to all of you to put pressure on us, the technology creators, to make sure that the systems we build reflect our shared values. And this is a responsibility that we as technologists need to take extremely seriously. Thanks a lot for your attention.